frame it a little bit. So you just wrapped up your biggest trade show of the year. Well, say, since I'm at RSA, you spent months preparing, countless hours prepping content and experiences and questions for attendees, and now the show is over. So it's time to move on to the next thing. But is it really the time to move on to the next thing? So what we want to focus on today is obviously talking about content, how we can maximize your investment at a 3-day event, and similar to what we were talking about last week, make it a moment over time instead of just that moment in time.
Yep.
And, being that you've been in field marketing and events for quite some time and you're quite the expert, and as soon as you brought it up, I'm like, yes, this is a topic we need to dive into further. So thinking about how to create content from those 3 days and turn it into, an all year endeavor, where do you start with something like that?
No, it's a great question. I think, obviously, you were just, talking about the post event, but I think where you start, and it goes without saying, but where you start is that planning process. And that is not just planning for the event itself. That is aligning from a cross-functional marketing collaborative experience, if you will, on, what is the go-to-market plan? What are the product launches? Is there an opportunity to leverage this event as a campaign, a true campaign in itself, or can this event support multiple or single campaigns on site? And then I think once you've done that and you've had that, those guidelines and those goals, and you've established those key stakeholders, then it's about creating those opportunities to maximize the content that will be produced by the marketing team, executed and, maximized and promoted by the event marketing team on site, leveraging sales, leveraging thought leaders, however you're going to be able to do it. Once you've done that, that is sort of the beginning of putting the wheels in motion to the event execution, then the event follow-up, which you were just hitting on, right? Sort of the post-event story and how that will be implemented, right? And there's a lot of ways to do that, and I'm happy to dive into that as well.
Yeah, I love your point there, talking about maximizing the event content. Yes, of course, that's the whole point of what we're talking about.
Right.
But I always describe trade shows as an integrated marketing campaign within itself. It's such a microcosm of just like a larger program. So to treat it like that from the planning phase is, it's an advantage for your company already.
Yeah, and I learned that early on in my career, and I think one thing that from an event marketing, demand gen, field marketing function, right? A lot of the times we are so focused, and rightfully so, on lead quality, ensuring a timely handover of those quality conversations, accelerating that pipeline. And, as we develop our recaps and as we, hand over those leads to sales, and I think one thing that we need to do as we're evaluating ROI is to evaluate ROI in a different lens of okay, yes, we got the leads. Sales is following up with them. They have the messaging. They have the story. They have what they need to do their job. Now, also, we need to look at from a content perspective. We've done our job. We've taken the leads. We've maximized it. We literally talked to everyone we could. Right? We had those engaging conversations. Everyone, gave their A+ effort. But now we need to be able to take that lens and flip it and say, okay, did we maximize the moment? Did that product launch go okay? Did we capture all of the thought leadership? Did we have customers' testimonials? And whatever those, sort of content packageable moments are, did we put our best foot forward? I know a lot of the times, a lot of event marketers, they get really focused on the now, the setup, the breakdown, the staffing, all of the sort of logistics. That's part of the planning and part of the execution. But as I was mentioning earlier, you really need to elevate yourself above the chaos and really figure out how we're gonna, take advantage of those moments and then package them for our marketing partners, social, digital, PR, right? Like, and we're not just event marketers, we're marketers. And I think continue to remember that and how we are stewards of that message, stewards of that content, and then sharing it back with our marketing partners, I think is critical. especially in this world, as you know, Jay, of like tight budgets. You know, anytime there's a little bit of you know, issues at a company or anything like that, you know, marketing events are looked at because they cost a lot. So
Yep.
how you are maximizing that event outside of leads, reasonable content is a great way to sort of cover yourself, you know, in terms of, you know, evaluating your team's success.
Yeah, I think it's finding an efficiency. You know,
Yeah.
first of all, you should be looking at trade shows and events as an investment. If you're just looking at it as an expense, you're already on a, you know, it's a lost cause because you're never going to be, you know, selling directly at a trade show. So if you're thinking of it as an investment in your pipeline, in your sales organization, in your marketing organization, and how you can elevate that, and while also finding those efficiencies, you're ahead of the curve already.
I agree. And I think like, and we could dive into this a little bit more, but I think you nailed it, right? And this is getting a little bit off topic in terms of content, but I think when you said, you know, we're not going to close deals on site, right? You know, maybe you will, but you know, odds are you're planting that seed, right? You're top of funnel, your pipeline growth, you're establishing that pipeline, you're scheduling a demo, you're giving people an introduction of not only your product, but your brand. And then you take them on that go-to-market journey. So an event can be the starter of an opportunity, or it can be an accelerator of an opportunity, right? And I think that's an advantage that event marketing, field marketing has, you know, I'm biased obviously, but amongst other marketing channels, is it can be tweaked to serve multiple, you know, levels of the pipeline, if you will.
Yeah. So speaking of, you know, repurposing the content and focusing on that aspect of it, what would be like some normal, or maybe not normal, not the right word. What are just some like objectives you'd have for repurposing that content? What are you looking at there?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, one example that comes to mind is that, going back to my most recent point, is if the event is sort of the launchable moment, right? So let's use our example, right? We just launched a product. You know, we strategically picked this event to be that launchable date, right? So we teased it out, we promoted it through our social, we invited all of the people on site to come check it out. We have, you know, media there. We've invited customers, prospects to this launch, right? This launch date. And this is where you're going to get sort of the tutorial, the demos, however you're going to, you know, for this example. Once you've done that, now how do I keep them interested in that product, right? And that's where that event is the beginning. And then now you're taking them on a true go-to-market journey of, you know, okay, now you've seen the product launch. Now we're going to have a more detailed webinar that is going to get into the intricacies, maybe by vertical or industry, right? Industry specific. You can get really customizable in that next step, for example. And then just keeping that level of interest and how we can get them to meet with our sales team, right? Or talk to an SDR, talk to a BDR, or maybe even account executive. So, you know, that is a very high level example. But I think if the event is the beginning, I want to make sure that, you know, they're getting custom, they're getting a white paper on what they just saw. We're having a webinar on what we just saw, but in more detail. If they don't attend, then they're getting a recording of that webinar. And we're keeping that level of interest for a relevant audience, right? And I think that is really key in any sort of marketing channel. But, you know, keeping it fresh and, you know, in sort of relative from a content perspective. I think that is too, right? So many times you have an event, it's like, hey, thanks for stopping by. You know, here's our speaking session. But I would want to take it a step further where you're sort of, you know, you're taking that customer, potential customer on a content journey specific to what their needs are with that product launch. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of kind of what I'm getting to in terms of, you know, leveraging social, leveraging white papers, content syndication, sort of the full field marketing funnel of a product launch, if you will.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And actually also answered a lot of what I was going to ask next about, you know, you could basically go on different tracks with it, whether it's like taking a video of a hands-on demo, because a lot of times people want to be at that event to get their hands on it and see how this product works. And if you're doing it through the lens of another attendee, it's like, oh, this is exactly what I want to see. Yeah, you're not going to personalize it 100%, but it at least gets your customer's mind working. It's like, oh, I want to know more about this specific aspect. And it's like, yeah, you record the demo right there. You got it. You have a theater presentation with subject matter experts, hopefully that are not all from within your company, and you record that and you turn it into a separate webinar. To your point, I think that is all so valuable. Plus, it'll bring you ideas for other things to do throughout the year. It's like, yeah, we recorded this. All right, let's dive deeper into this topic. It obviously got a lot of like traction through our campaign after the show.
Yeah, and again, in this hybrid event space, right, post COVID, like I think it gives us this opportunity to do just that, right? I think of a lot of the campaigns that I've run, having thought leaders, as you mentioned, on site, being able to capture that moment live, right? We have the benefit of technology, right? And be able to go, whether it's LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, whatever it is, but be able to broadcast, if you will, from the booth. We've done podcasts on site. We've done a lot of sort of going back to that brand recognition, of leveraging the moment, right? And these aren't cheap, right, investments, right? And so you really, going back to what I was saying earlier, you really want to make sure that you're maximizing that moment. However, based on sort of how the marketing team is structured, maybe you don't have all of that, but identifying what you do have, what you do well, and then sort of, increasing the volume, if you will, turning up the noise from a brand recognition campaign.
That makes a lot of sense. What type of resources does it take to, whether it's effectively capturing it or creating the content after the event? Like, what types of roles typically are used to do that?
No, it's again, great question. I think going back to sort of the pre-event setup, if you will, right? I'm very process oriented, so you'll hear me go back to the beginning. You really want to establish those key stakeholders who you need to get it done, right? So obviously, from an event perspective, you need sales, you need thought leaders. But now, from a marketing perspective, I need my team, right? And based on budgets, based on travel restrictions, whatever that may be, you have to be adaptable. But in a perfect case scenario, right, I would want my social team there, right? I would want my digital team there, being able to sort of do a webinar live or do a podcast live, and then be able to get it out that evening or tomorrow, right? And one thing that I think sort of kills two birds with one stone, right, is not only are we promoting our product, but social has the advantage of promoting our event, right? Or digital has the event to promote our presence as well. So I think you sort of have that nuance of, yeah, we are giving them the content post-event, but they have such a great opportunity to promote the product launch. So it is a true team effort that sometimes I think gets lost, in sort of the day-to-day, got to get it done, got to set up the booth, got to do all of this, right? You need to leverage your teams properly. Again, in my experience, we've had social, we've had production companies, whether that is internal or, vendor sourced, right? And they're capturing those moments. They're conducting those interviews. We have a camera crew, whatever it is, whatever the budget sort of allocates you to be able to do it. I think it starts with social and digital, to answer your question.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely social and digital. I mean, even potentially bringing in like a copywriter to focus on some conversion copywriting, I think can be really helpful. And just taking like snippets of what people are saying. It's like, let's just turn this into a quote and send it out. It's like, this is what people are saying about us on site. Did you miss it? Do you want to see it now in however format we
100%. Like, there's so much value in, and again, I know not every marketing team has this, but short form writing, right? Be able to get those snippets out. And if you don't have the budget, there's so many great AI tools now that you can do that yourself, right? And being self-sufficient, I think goes a long way. But yeah, I think, I would start with social, digital. You bring up a great point with the copywriting as well.
Well, and for people that can't hire a copywriter because they're not inexpensive, they're good ones are not hard to find. Tapping into your sales development reps or your business development reps, they're doing this day in, day out. Like tapping into them as a resource to bring them into your team to help with something like this. It'll elevate them and they'll feel great about, oh, I can't believe they're asking me about this. But it's like, yes, it's also an already paid resource out of somebody else's budget. So
Absolutely. And we would actually try, and a lot of, my events over the years is, to me, it's great experience to have SDRs on site as well for them, right? Because, they're so used to on the phone and email, and this really sharpens their skill set, right? And really sort of gets them comfortable in talking face to face. And then, so, again, you scratch your back, I scratch my, yours, like leveraging what we need from them, but putting them in an environment to succeed as grow as well as sort of a, an SDR in a sales world to get them where they want to be in their career as well. So again, I'm biased, but there's a lot, as you are, but there's a lot of advantages of sort of that ecosystem of community and sort of that on-site, hey, we're in this together, this is our brand moment, leveraging sales, leveraging marketing, leveraging customer success teams. All of that goes into sort of I think a successful event.
Yeah, and you touched on it earlier, and it can't be reinforced more. It's like, you need to get sales involved early for these things, and that sales and marketing alignment, especially when it comes to events, is everything. I mean, if sales isn't generating leads and pipeline at these events, you're going to lose your budget. So getting them aligned and helping with the content that you're producing on the ground level, I think only reinforces that much more.
Absolutely. And again, I've had a lot of great relationships with sales folks over the years. And I think a lot of it comes down to just transparency and don't waste their time. Right. And this goes into, sponsorship, allocation, but also sponsorship review, right? Make sure you're going to the right events, make sure you're getting you're putting your sales team in the position to talk to the right audience, right? What could have been your audience a year ago. Maybe the event is transformed, right? Maybe they have a different owner, right? Maybe they have a different sponsor, and that sort of, has changed the persona that is on site, right? And what worked well in year one might not work in year two, right? And sort of having that understanding, of not wasting, the account executive's time, has gone a long way in terms of, I think, establishing that internal trust. That we are putting them in a position to succeed.
I love that. Yeah, I think that will make a big difference in the results of your event. It'll a big difference in the results of the content that's getting out there, because who's sharing that content the most? It's going to be the sales team.
Exactly. How you package it, how you can package it in a way that is, easily shareable, at a optimal speed, I think is something that is critical for us as well.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So speaking of the sales funnel a little bit and how content is repurposed, are there good uses of event content to nurture leads and move them further down the funnel?
Yes, absolutely. I think, one thing that comes to mind would be, I would say, testimonials, right? Anytime you can capture, and again, there's a lot of legwork that goes into this, right? In terms of the prep, but, anytime you can capture a live demo, as you mentioned, or if you can capture a customer testimonial, maybe they're there for a dinner that you're hosting, being able to, and this goes back into vertical specific content and probably getting into the weeds a little bit, but anytime you can have someone else speak to industry specific problems that could lead to the adoption of your product, you're much more successful than having a salesperson do it, in my opinion. Right. Like, I think, having, and I think a sales guy would say this too, right? At the end of the day, someone who uses the product and has the same pain points that I have, I'm going to be more apt to, listen to them and maybe pick their brain. So I think anytime we can leverage that customer testimonials, I think, thought leadership, maybe, and not even about your product, right? I think, going back to, being the steward of the content, it doesn't need to be like, hey, here's my product, buy our product, schedule a demo. It can be more of like, hey, here's who we are as a brand. Here's our space, right? Here's our ecosystem. Now, we are sponsoring a talk track on X, Y, and Z, right? And that could be relevant to you, right? It may not be, hey, buy our product, adopt our platform, but it's something that is relevant to you. And we're providing that to you as value add. Now, that's very top of funnel, right? That's not going to close the deal, but that gives you sort of brand recognition, brand credibility, and establishes you as a thought leader, then you sort of take them on the true content syndication, the webinars, the more detailed deep dive as they're more acclimated, familiar with your company. I think too many times people make the mistake of, hey, saw you at a trade show, buy our product. And again, that's okay, right? That can work, but depending on the brand. But if you're trying to establish, brand credibility in a space, you need to do that before you're going to close deals. And I think sometimes, especially in a very competitive environment, that can be sort of lost. And you need to really establish the who we are versus why buy, right? You need to do who we are, then why buy, and how it will serve your team well.
Yeah. Well, and on the nurturing front specifically, it's like, I think I've read a stat recently. It's like 5% of buyers are actually in market. That leaves you 95% that are like, oh, in the fact finding, or not even like they're not even in the awareness phase. So it's like, yeah, rather than send a generic, like, this is what we do, this is the problem we solve. It's like, hey, just that thought leadership piece. I think you nailed it. It's like, that is such an important, it's a trust building, relationship building piece without overtly being like, I'm selling you right now, because that's ultimately all of this is selling you. That is the goal of all content, no matter what anybody says. I'm adding value to your life, so you think of me when you are buying.
Exactly. No, again, I mean, that's any good marketer, good salesperson will say that, right? And I think sometimes it's just the macro factor of like deal closing that sometimes, can get lost in sort of, building a true funnel and then accelerating that, right? And then, that's a whole different field marketing event there's tactics there to help sales do that as well, right? But if we're focusing on sort of, initial moment and initial connection, you got to establish that credibility first.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Trust and likability comes first.
Absolutely.
Without that, you're not getting to the next phase no matter what.
Absolutely.
Okay. You mentioned it before about like customer testimonials, but going a little deeper on that area, like specifically like user generated content, say an attendee is creating this content, how is that something you can potentially work into your content strategy?
So what do you mean exactly? Do you mean like back?
So say an attendee is recording, content at the show for their own purposes that they're sharing on social. Like, how can you use that kind of user generated content and work it into your content plan?
Yeah, I think, and again, I've been interviewed, I've been sort of asked, but coming up with an attendee. I think first of all, you need to establish, try to establish who they are, right, and what they're doing, and make sure. And again, this is a little bit into the weeds, but make sure that they are, they have permission to use your product and capture your booth. I think that goes a long way, right? There might be something from written on there that maybe isn't for public knowledge yet, right? Maybe it's a product launch that is tomorrow, right? So just being on top of that, but establish who they are, right? And then, find out what they want, what their purposes are, why they're capturing this content. And if it's a valid, legitimate opportunity, find the right thought leader, find the right person to answer those questions, right? I think, and this goes to anyone early on in their career or further along, you don't have to be a hero, right? Find out exactly what they're asking and then identify the person at the company who can best answer that question. Because it's not, we don't have editing ability, right? So once that interview happens and they walk away, they have whatever you just said. So that's more of a preachy sort of, something to keep an eye out for. But if it's done well, share information, right? It's free content, right? And leverage it similar to what we discussed, right? And maybe prop them out a little bit, right? If they're a customer, if they're a brand that we may not be familiar with or are familiar with, like, hey, we just spoke with Joe at X brand, and he asked some interesting questions on X, Y, and Z, and you sort of have a organic partnership that sort of developed on site. And that's the beauty of events as well, right? Like, that's the only moment where you can meet face to face and get some free publication, and then maybe free validity, going back to sort of that credibility. So I would say embrace it, right? At a high level, but just make sure you have your ducks in a row in terms of who they are and what they're asking.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it's a blessing and a curse to go with user-generated content because, hey, yes, it's free press, but hopefully it's going in the direction you want it to go, and being a little bit careful with that. Not you want to associate with it, but it's like, well, I'm skeptical of this person. I don't even know who you are. So yeah,
it's funny. I mean, there's so many of those sort of watch what you say when you say it. Examples, right? I remember I had a boss who was very adamant about, hey, when you're at an event, you're always at an event, right? That could be at a hotel, that could be in an elevator, that could be, and you got that shirt on, you got that logo on, you're representing that brand at all times. So, those are sort of things that have stuck with me in terms of, you don't want to overspeak, when you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I can relate. Those are some of my best conversations at conferences are usually in the elevator. It's like, oh, I know you.
Yeah.
When you least expect it. So yeah,
and
no,
you're
on,
great,
you're on.
Right? Yeah, that's great. And you're always on. You're always on.
Nice. I only got a couple more questions for you. So we talked about like how we repurpose the content. We talked about some of the ways it can obviously generate leads and generate sales and thought leadership. What are some KPIs people can look into to make sure that they're choosing the right pieces of content to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I would treat it from a event marketing, field marketing lens is you've captured that content, right? And now you treat whatever you're producing as its own campaign. Right. So you've done the event, you've created the event, you've generated leads. Now, whatever you're creating, whether that's a webinar, a white paper, or a podcast, you just adopt those KPIs and you treat it as, if it's a white paper, how many views, how many, so you just are basically taking that process of creating that content and then executing it based on what KPIs you've established. So if it's a webinar, right, it could be, registrations, conversion from registrations to attending, everything that sort of goes into that webinar, but that just sort of just gets added to the overall field marketing, digital marketing, campaign goals when you're looking at that dashboard. So again, it's all, I guess it all depends, to answer your question, it all depends on what type of content it is. But, could be impressions, right? If it's a social, it could be, it really could be anything, whatever you're creating, it would just have to adapt to that campaign, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. And it was a little bit of a loaded question because like, you're basically marrying it up to the metrics that you're already looking at.
Right. But you bring up a good point. Like and this is something that I think I will certainly do going forward in my career, is from an event perspective, and this is what I said earlier, right? We're always going to look at, ROI, SQLs, cost per lead, MQLs, all the way down to SAOs from a campaign, right? And that's the same thing I would do with content campaigns that we created from that event. But we look at that on a cost per perspective. I think, looking at now, right? And this is maybe how field marketing and event marketers need to look at it, especially in this world of results and spending. Treat it as sort of an overarching campaign, right? So like we spent $100,000 on an event. We generated 600 leads from that event. But we also created another 3,000 leads from a social campaign that went out after, or, a demo. So that needs to be sort of the overall story. And that's why I think there's and it's a good thing, right? But there's such high visibility on events, and good, bad, or indifferent. And I think sort of you put out a recap, you tell the story of how the event performed, but there needs to be a caveat there of like, hey, well, we just produced, a calendar's worth of content that needs to be sort of captured as a KPI and tied back from an attribution perspective, whether it's in Salesforce or other platforms. but, make sure that it's tied back and that is also attributed. Now, people may argue or whatever, but I think that's on your marketing, your CMO, you as a marketing leader to sort of work out, amongst ourselves. But I think in terms of getting the buy-in and establishing, as a, I'm biased, but as a leader on the marketing channels in terms of production, that's a great sort of, way to sort of, leverage or say hey, we're going to add another 1,000, right, from a webinar. Yes, it's a webinar, but the content was from the event, right? So it needs to sort of, however you do it, just need to make sure you attribute it properly.
Yeah, no, I think that's really key as an event marketer. It's like, hey, look at all these pieces of content we created that's helping subsidize the marketing spend that they would have been using afterwards.
We just saved you. Yeah,
it drops the cost per lead considerably in that case.
Right. You don't need to record a podcast. We just recorded 6 episodes, right? With 6 thought leaders that just so happened to be at the event, right? Like instead of flying them in or instead of, having them on a Zoom, right? There's so many advantages but again, that's prep, right? That's having a true go-to-market strategy. That's thinking holistically as a marketer from a strategic perspective as well.
No, I love that. I think that it goes a long way with that pre-planning process. You're not just thinking about the pre-show marketing or the at-show experience or the post-show follow-up. It's like, all right, we need to do the same thing with our content plan. Like, what is our content plan from beginning to end, and how can we maximize every ounce of this event?
Yeah, and again, this, from an event planning perspective, October, right, or the budgets start to come around, whatever it is, we're looking already the next year and a half out. And if we've established that we are a legitimate marketing channel and we've identified events or moments or a series of our own as, first party events, and we've established that internal credibility, then, a product marketing team or a CMO or, anybody, right, sort of internally is going to say, hey, this is a moment, right? And then they'll build the product launches, they'll build the product, updates or, PR moments or whatever that is. They'll build them into the event because you've established that credibility. So then that's where it gets fun, and that's where you can really, expand upon that content.
I love that. All right, my final question: are there any key takeaways or lessons or even watch outs that you can share from just past content initiatives?
Yes. I would say don't try to do too much. I think obviously, you're there to produce results, right? And you're there to, again, depending on what world you're in, but, generate leads, generate pipeline, accelerate pipeline, all those things that I mentioned. That should be a focus, and a number one focus, 1A, 1B, wherever you want to rank it. And so make sure your house is in order from an execution, logistics, operational perspective, right? That's why you either do it yourself or you have a team to do it. And then pick a few things. I've been at events where we try to do a podcast, we do a launch, we do all of that. Make sure whatever you're doing is 100% versus doing 5 things 75%. So that's my advice just from my career and my learnings is pick 1 or 2 initiatives and really hone in on perfecting them and then, post event expanding upon them.
That makes sense. Yeah. Start small and then grow from there.
Yeah,
don't try to,
right? Yeah.
Don't boil the ocean, as I like to tell the sales team.
Because if once you do that, then, it's a snowball effect, right? If something derails.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. Well, that's all I got, Kyle. I would say the only thing I guess I'll close with this. Where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Kyle Gordon, and they can find me on Instagram, gdigitydog. Those are probably the 2 places to find me. And yeah, I look forward to connecting and answering any questions that people may have.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and we'll get.